Did the director do the right thing today?
I think the director did do the right thing, Kailey. Ultimately, she is responsible. Heavy is the head who wears the crown, right? And so being ultimately responsible for any and all things that happen with the Secret Service, whether or not she was operationally aware of what was going on directly on that day, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And so she took full responsibility, as a director should, and resigned.
Well, it's interesting, and obviously these are very different scenarios, but it was not so long ago that there was another push in Congress for a resignation. It was for the chair of the FDIC, Marty Gruenberg, because of a toxic workplace culture at that federal regulator. He did ultimately resign, and the person who was selected to take his place came from outside of the FDIC, because there was a conversation about whether it was cultural. Do you need someone to come in versus elevating someone from within the place in which the cultural toxicity was emanating from? How should we think about this with the Secret Service? Does someone else independent need to come in to try to fix up these problems, or can only someone else who has been a member of the service rise to the top because they know the intricacies of what is required to protect the president and former presidents?
I think both things can apply. At the end of the day, I think you need to look internally, for good candidates to possibly take over. There's no substitute for someone. And I believe she had been a Secret Service member of the Secret Service for almost 30 years. So there's no substitute for someone that intrinsically knows the agency, knows the policies, the people, can rally around that particular person. But there also is something to be said with someone outside of federal government, or possibly someone from another federal agency coming in at possibly at a SES level at another federal agency and moving over to Secret Service within Homeland Security. So I think at the end of the day, the best person for the job needs to be vetted. And whether that's inside the agency or whether that's a transfer from another agency or a private organization, I think at the end of the day, that needs to be considered. So all options on the table need to be there, in my opinion.
Well, we do know that Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has appointed, at least in an acting capacity, Ronald Rowe. For now, there's a question as to whether or not the ultimate replacement for Cheatle should be someone that has to be confirmed by the Senate. But while we're talking about the way in which Congress has reacted to this, obviously there was a contentious oversight hearing yesterday. The chair of the Oversight Committee, Jim Comer, put out a statement after Cheatle's resignation saying that while it's a step toward accountability, we need a full review of how these security failures happen so that we can prevent them from going forward. Brian, given your experience with the service, how long do you expect this is actually going to take to reach completion?
I think a full investigation will actually come out a lot quicker than what we seem to believe. I think they have all the parties involved. There is a sense of urgency with this particular matter, considering how close the president, former President Trump, did come to succumbing to possible wounds. But I think a full review, I think it's important for us to not succumb to putting something out without properly giving it a final review from all parties involved. I believe the FBI is on this particular investigation. So I don't think we need to succumb to any pressure necessarily from Congress. I think it needs to be very thorough, but I think it'll come out a lot quicker than what people tend to believe.
Well, Brian, as you talk about the wounds that Donald Trump, of course, did receive, if we're talking about a zero, or could have received in the worst case scenario, it would have been a gunshot wound. This is a gunman who was on a roof with a AR-style semi-automatic weapon. And Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of the Oversight Committee, we heard from him a bit earlier, also had this to say about the specific weapon that was involved in this event. Take a listen.
I do hope that we don't lose sight of the larger problem, which is AR-15 and assault weapon violence generally. And the vast majority of Americans support an assault weapon ban. We had one between 1994 and 2004. It worked when that was allowed to expire. Mass shootings went up by more than 100%. Most people on Earth do not live like this. People in Canada don't live like this. People in Europe don't live like this. And we shouldn't be living like this.
Brian, if we were to see the assault weapons ban go back into place, or just any form of tighter gun control, would that make the job of the Secret Service easier?
I don't necessarily think it would make the job easier. We used to go by a saying that guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? People with these guns. So I think there needs to be a broader approach in dealing with, profiles, mental health, things of that nature. Whether it was an AR-15 or a handgun or some other type of weapon that the individual had on that particular roof. We have to deal with those types of security failures and making sure that we shore those things up. So I don't necessarily think it'll make the job any easier. It's a very tough job in itself. Out securing an outdoor rally is one of the most difficult things you can do as a Secret Service agent. So.
Well, on that note, given that we are in the middle of an election cycle and Donald Trump is likely to want to hold more rallies, Kamala Harris held a rally in Wisconsin just today. Is the way in which that happens for the next 4 months until the election going to have to be different as a result of what happened last weekend, even as we still await for final answers on what exactly went down?
You'll see more safeguards in play. Some of the conveniences or access to possible rallies, parade routes, things of that nature. You'll see more scrutiny, more security around those. I'm sure you'll see the security zones widening out and going even further into the areas in terms of law enforcement presence. And so those are the things I think we need to be very, very aware of in terms of magnetometers. All of these things that we utilize to prevent things like this will be utilized even more in force. And so some of the convenience, some of the shots that you want to see and the rope lines that you want to see with the protectee, I think some of those things will be back down dramatically as we look to ensure look to ensure a non-eventful rest of the campaign.